Welcome, and thank you so much for being here and for your support of the Adirondack Explorer. The recreation stories we do, the hikes and the paddles and climbing, are one of the most popular things that we do. So we are glad tonight to have Mike Lynch, who's our multimedia reporter and does a lot of the recreation coverage for the Explorer, be here tonight with Chris Maron from Champlain Area Trails. So you couldn't have a better duo to talk about what to do in that area of the park. Chris is the executive director of Champlain Area Trails. As I mentioned, that's a nonprofit that land trust that builds and promotes the trails. And he's been in that position since 2009, which is also when the organization was established. So he's been there since the beginning. And before that, he worked at the Nature Conservancy and with other, and 10 of those years with the Nature Conservancy in the Adirondacks. So I'm sure that the two of them can tell you a lot about the what to do in the Champlain Valley. And Mike is going to share with us some of the beautiful photography that he does for the Adirondack Explorer. And he spent a lot of time down there for stories for the Explorer, and especially in this year. But you know, he has a lot to share. So anyway, thank you both for doing this today. And the rest of you can listen in and put your questions in the chat throughout the talk. And
yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Adirondack Explorer, for making this happen and focusing on the Champlain Valley. And thanks to everybody out there who's watching and has an interest in this. Yeah, so Champlain Area Trails began really in about 2006. And it really started at, actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. Children's book author Stephen Kellogg and a friend named Bruce Klink, they both live in Essex. We're in Charlotte, and Stephen was giving a talk at Bruce's grandchildren's school. And so they were in the airport, and they both realized they were reading Bill McKibben's book, Wandering Home. And in that book, he talks about going from his home over in Ripon to Vermont down to Johnsburg in the southern Adirondacks. And he sort of walks, and he walks the whole way, although he does get rowed across Lake Champlain by John Davis. And so he walked through the Champlain Valley, through Essex and our part, you know, in Westport in this area, and just talked about what a fabulous place it is, and the mixture of farms and forests and wetlands. And so Bill and Stephen and Bruce just said, gosh, you know, we should have some trails here, you know, because all the people go to the high peaks and we've got the most amazing place. So why don't we make some trails? So they came back and they called up several people, and we met over at Stephen Kellogg's barn, which is really sort of a house, but really fabulous place. And we, you know, quickly realized that the Champlain Valley was the last part that was added to the Adirondack Park. It wasn't part of the original Blue Line, but they added it. And it had, and so because of that, there's very little public land, and there were few hiking trails. And because of that, the outdoor recreation didn't really help the Champlain Valley economy that much, because people were driving through the valley just to go to the high peaks and hike up there. So at those meetings, about, you know, 1 or 2 or 3, we sort of concluded, well, let's just start making trails. And thankfully, there was an organization called the Eddy Foundation that had about 2,000 acres, and they were very open to us making trails. They're on the western part of Essex in the Boquet Mountain area. And so we thought, great, we can start making trails there. And that's exactly what we did. And then, you know, everything costs money, and you have to be an organization, you actually need to organize. So we did form as a nonprofit organization called Champlain Area Trails in 2009. And that's when I moved from becoming one of the founders to becoming the executive director. And as a nonprofit organization, you have a mission, which you can see in this slide here. But the short one, the elevator speech, is we save land and make trails. And through that, we connect people with nature and promote economic vitality. So then, so we're going to make trails, right? And most of the land's privately owned in the Champlain Valley. So that means we have to go out and reach out to private landowners and get them to agree to have trails. And thankfully, many do. And we do that through a revocable trail agreement where the landowner can cancel it with 60 days notice, which is good for the landowner because he's not locked in. However, we can put a lot of time into a trail, and then the person says, well, sorry, you got to go. which has only really happened once. But anyway, as landowners change, that may happen more often. But so we're working to make our trails permanent, as short of that. So in the 12 years that we've been in official existence, we've created actually about 60 miles of trails, and we've got about 44 trails. We're a land trust. We do land conservation work, and we've conserved about 973 acres on our own. And in partnership with other organizations, we've conserved another 1,500 acres. So we're really proud of the trails that we've made, but also, we want our trails to link communities and take people to cool places. And there's a lot of great places like that here. And so we see we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And so to help build public support for our trails and the conservation, we have outdoor education outings where we teach people about, what's so cool ecologically about the Champlain Valley, and actually just go out just to have fun. Then again, part of our mission is to promote economic vitality. And until COVID came, we had something called the Grand Hike every year that went from Westport to Essex to showcase town-to-town hiking. And the last year it attracted about 320 people, and we ended up at the Essex Inn and helped to support that business. And we hear from many businesses and chambers of commerce how Champlain area trails has such economic benefit for the area. So anyway, again, we're a nonprofit organization, so we were certainly request everybody to please help us out and be donors to us. But in the meantime, please hike our trails and enjoy this area. So back to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So now we'll start talking about one of the trails Chris and I hiked together when we got together in the early winter. So we went to the North Boquet Mountain. We did the North Boquet Summit Trail, which is a fairly new trail. When was that put in, Chris? When did you guys build that?
Oh, let's see. That was one of our earlier ones. This is probably about 2009. I guess. No, probably about 2011.
2011. But the actual wasn't the Summit Trail? Didn't they establish or do some recent work on that?
Yeah, we did that pretty recently. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess I wasn't. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so we did the North Boquet Summit Trail, which is in a little outside of Essex, New York. And right here is a photo of Chris and Bill Amadon, who does trail work for the organization. He's in the front there with the red vest on, and his dog. And as you can see, this is another trail with great viewpoints out to where you can see out to Lake Champlain and the Green Mountains. So there's the views. You got to take in a number of views on the way up here. Bill had made a nice trail where there's a lot of switchbacks and then little spurs that take you to little vantage points. And on the way up, we enjoyed these vantage points. We did a late afternoon hike, hoping to get some good light, and you'll see that in the next photos here. See, this is actually towards the end of the hike. We were coming down the mountain, and it's looking in the same direction, but you can see there's a little bit more alpenglow on the Green Mountains there. And Chris, you can actually see to the White Mountains from this hike, can't you?
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bill Amadon's talked about how he can see Mount Washington on some rare days.
Okay.
And yeah.
And so down here is also you can't see it in this photo, but the Boquet River runs through here. So once you get up, Pat, you could do the switchbacks and go up to the summit. And from the summit, there's not much of a view, but then you can walk past the summit and get a nice view of the high peaks. And this is the view of the high peaks. When we were up there, it wasn't the best light for photography in that direction because the sun was behind them and it was a bit hazy, but it was still a nice view. And I would say the best time to go up there is probably early in the day, and then you get some nice lighting on the mountains. So one of the things we were talking about during this trip was the biodiversity of the forest in the Champlain Valley. And that was brought up because Jerry Jenkins, a botanist who's worked on climate change and a lot of other subjects in the Adirondacks in recent decades, did some studies in the West Champlain Hills. And Chris, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what he found when studying these areas.
Okay, sure. And, first, just to clarify is that when you asked the question about when the trail was built, I was thinking about the one on South Boquet Mountain. That was like about 2011. And we just completed this trail in 2020. So it took about a year to get it done. So the North Boquet is about 2020. And we just had a new trail map come out. And so for the first time, the North Boquet Summit Trail is on our trail map. So that's how new it is. Yeah, so going to Jerry Jenkins, and he put out a paper in 2008 called the West Champlain Valley Hills. And he said that part of the, one of the main purposes of doing this was that there's a forest type called oak hickory forest. Many of us have probably heard that type of forest type talked about before, but he said that had really been little studied here in the Champlain Valley. And so he decided to do some field surveys and to learn more about what its distribution was and what species were comprising the biodiversity there. And, he noted that it occurs on a lot of south-facing slopes, and it's sort of on the, topper part, the higher part of the mountain. And like I said, sort of south and sunny, warm-facing slopes. And so through his studies, again, when you study vegetation, you have to look at the rocks and the soils. And he came up with that these are limestone-based soils called calcareous soils, and they're fairly dry, actually pretty dry. And so through his studies, he identified and named a new forest community, which is sort of a mouthful. It's a dry calcareous oak hickory hornbeam forest. And what that basically is it's dry, it's limestone soils, and oak hickory and hornbeam are the dominant trees. And he realized that this is a really biologically diverse area. And after doing all these studies, he concluded that that these oak hickory forests are more diverse and richer in rarities than any other forest in the Adirondack Park. And so again, his study showed that these dry calcareous oak hickory forests have a tremendous amount of biological diversity. And so the question is why? And the answer is because the soil types aren't that rich, so the species are a little bit more not as full and not as big and not as much leaf cover. And so it allows a lot more light to get to the forest floor. And so, as you might know in botany, that if you get a lot of light coming throughout the whole year, that the plant species change over from early spring into August. So you have little small plants in the spring, and by August and September, you've got plants that are, 2 and 3 feet tall that grow into flower. And so this is much like savannas out in the Midwest. They got widely spaced trees, and so therefore you got a lot more plants growing underneath the trees. And so that's the reason why the dry calcareous oak hickory forest is so diverse, and it is the most biologically diverse natural community in the Adirondack Park.
Well, thanks. That's pretty interesting. That's something I hadn't expected to hear when I first went down there and started hiking. So here's this is North Boquet Mountain there where we just were, and we're going to drive down to Daisy Meadow Farm and start visiting some farmlands and learning about them. Here, this is Daisy Meadow Farm. It's a farm in Westport. You probably, if you've driven down to the village of Westport from the direction of the high peaks or the interior Adirondacks, you probably pass this. It's on the main road. This land is owned by Dave and Cynthia Johnson, and Dave actually, the two of them actually used to own the hostel in Keene Valley, so they're very familiar with the hiking community. And Dave, he actually hiked part of the Appalachian Trail back in the 90s, and he really enjoyed staying in a lot of the lodges along the way, and enjoyed the hospitality of the people along the Appalachian Trail. And I think he tries to pass that on to, to hikers in this day and age, and he allows them to go on his property, and he's a very friendly guy if you run into him on his property. But I think it's kind of interesting, it's a different experience when you hike through the farmlands in the Champlain Valley as opposed to, going hiking in the high peaks or something where it's very dense. It's, more open when you're hiking in these farmlands, and they often have farm stands and sometimes at the trailheads. So that's kind of fun too. You can pop in and look at the menu of local foods and maybe pick something up for the way home. So when I hiked this some of the trails at this farm, I went through there was a number of different loops I could do, and one of them took me through a sugar bush, which was kind of fun. And so you can see the tubing running around this tree and going around the trail marker. And here's some old maple syrup buckets or one that was hanging off one of the trees here. And here's a heritage cattle that Dave raises and on his property. And you can see this when you walk through this one of the trails. It's along the edge. You can see all the cattle up there in the upper field. So Dave, I wanted to ask you, what kind of opportunities are there in the Champlain Valley for doing these type of hikes, hiking through farmlands, and what's the experience like?
Well, good. Yeah. So we've got a number of trails that go through fields and, farm fields. And I'd say, first of all, when we talk about farms, of course, you've got crop fields and you've got hay fields. And so obviously going through hay fields is something that is a lot easier than going through cropped fields where they plow. So I'd say all of our farm trails go through fields or along the edges of the fields. And so again, the Champlain Valley is a mix of farms and forests. And one of the great places where you can experience some of the fields is the aptly named Farm and Forest Trail, which goes between Wadhams and sort of Waylandsburg here in Westport and Essex. And so, it's really cool because again, you go through fields and they have this tremendous vistas, and you get into the woods, and of course you're in the woods. So you're seeing trees and, occasional views, and you come back in the fields and all of a sudden the whole world opens up again. You can just see a lot of the sky. You can see, that's not a mountaintop view, but it's a view across, farms and fields and looking over rivers and things like that, and rivers and wetlands. So anyway, and another great thing about the fields is they make really good cross-country skiing in the winter. So that's not one of the features. So other examples of our trails that go through fields, there's one called the Art Farm Trail over in outside of Wadhams. It's got some really cool art pieces that Ted Cornell, the owner, put there. And then there's one called Biles Crossing here in Westport, which is a historical trail because John Brown was friends of one of the original owners of that. And he came and stayed at this person's house when he passed through Westport. And then he also was the one who, the person who owned that property was the one that took John Brown's body from Westport all the way up to North Elba. So it's a historical farm. And again, it's got really wonderful fields you can go through. And another one is the Riverside Trail. And I think you might be talking about that next. So if that's a transition, we'll move over to Riverside Trail that also has some nice farmland on it.
Yeah, so we're so the Riverside Trail, that is on the Triple Green Jade farm property, and so that's up north near Willsboro. So you can see that in the top of the screen there. Daisy Meadow Farm is down in the southern part. So the Riverside Trail, that is a short little, I think it's about a mile long trail. It goes through it starts along if you take it in a counterclockwise direction, you walk along the road, which is the edge of the field, and then you follow a nice little stream down to the Boquet River, the same river where I showed photos of the salmon earlier. So when I went there, it was winter, obviously here, and the river was frozen over. It was really quiet. No one else was around, and I went down to the river, and it was kind of neat because I could see all the animal tracks along the top of the frozen river on the inch of snow there, and I could also hear an owl hooting in the distance. Um, this is the river bend that you get to right when you approach, and right here is the downstream just a bit, and you can see there was black ice that day when I was there, at least through the middle channel section of the river. But Chris, when you do this trail, you go through a number of different habitats, and that allows you, good opportunities for birding, especially when you get, to some of these habitats where there's meadows and open fields. And can you talk a little bit about, some of the opportunities for, what for birding on, some of these farm fields and, in the Champlain Valley?
Yeah, sure. And I'd say my colleague Derek Rogers is really the one to answer this question. He's the master birder. So, really birding depends on the habitat. And so if you've got varieties of habitat, then you're going to have greater varieties of birds. And so when you think about Riverside Trail, and actually until we started working on this slideshow, I hadn't really even thought about the varieties of habitat of Riverside Trail. I mean, I laid out the trail and I was just thinking like, well, where's it going to go? But in thinking about the diversity there, it's really amazing because it starts up by little farm buildings, and then it goes along the edge of the road. And along the edge of the road, of course, you got a lot of sort of invasive species or, species along their edge. But again, that's diversity unto itself. And then you got stuff along the road on one side and fields on the other. It goes into a little wet woods. And so again, you've got, birds that like that kind of habitat. That opens up into a wet field. The biological word for this is a fen as opposed to a bog. But anyway, that's more ecological speak, I guess, but it's a fen. And then you get to a creek that goes towards the river. And as you get close to that, you will pass through probably one of the more rare kinds of forests here in the Champlain Valley called the clay plain forest, which one time covered most of the plains here in the Champlain Valley, but most of it's been converted to farmland. And studies there show that this is one of the forests that has the most variety of tree species in it. So the clay plain forest is a little remnant of it here. And again, it provides for great habitat. Then when you get along the Boquet River, that's a riparian forest, a forest that grows along rivers. They don't mind getting wet during flooded areas and dried out when things get dry. And then after you pass through the riparian forest, you get out into an old field, which was one time farmed and is now letting you go back to forest. And again, grassland species. And then after passing through that, you get out into the fields and end up back where you started. So it's a really fabulous trail, fairly short, maybe about a mile. And you just go through tremendously different kinds of habitat. And if you're a birder or even a person looking for salamanders, you can find a great amount of biological diversity there.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So from Triple Green Jade Farm, if you wanted to go south to another interesting hike, you can go down to the Ancient Oak Trail. And I visited the Ancient Oak Trail in the spring. And I went there and I was looking for a trail that was quiet and also one that had a destination that was a little bit different from some of the other than the traditional destinations that that you have on hiking trails, which are often summits and waterfalls and even rivers that you just saw in the last slideshow. So this trail, it starts by taking you through a little oak forest, and then you get out to this meadow, which is another good place for birding in the spring. There's a wetland there, and you can walk through this section in a pretty short amount of time, and then you get back in the woods, and you arrive at this old oak tree that's a couple hundred years old. And I found this oak tree pretty fascinating on this particular day. The lighting was fairly good, and it was kind of fun to just seek out a new destination instead of a mountaintop or waterfall like I was seeing, and just kind of enjoy this old tree that had kind of survived the last couple centuries in the Champlain Valley, where there had been some farmlands cut like trees cut for farmlands and that type of thing. And here's another viewpoint of it. You can see this, the sun was behind it. But Chris, I want to ask, what type of opportunities are there for hiking in the Champlain Valley for finding these kind of, unique type destinations that aren't, mountain type tops or otherwise?
There's a lot of really great places to go that, are fabulous unto themselves without having, just, mountaintop views. I can start off with the Bobcat Trail. That's outside of Waylandsburg. And it starts off, you go through this meadow, which again has great birding, and then there's a woods, and then it goes by a series of beaver dams and beaver ponds. And so that's really pretty cool. Then, as I mentioned, the Art Farm Trail earlier, that is really great for grassland birds. And in the back, there's a little pond, which is sort of secluded, and migrating waterfowl come there. When you go down to Crown Point, there's a trail called Penfield Pond Trail over by the Penfield Museum. It's actually owned by the properties owned by the Penfield Museum. And it goes by a pond and a creek, and it's is a historical place because of Ironville and the Penfield area. Here in Westport, we have a short little trail right downtown called Lee Park. And it's just like, it goes by a little creek and goes through a really pretty forest. Down in Mariah, there's one called McConley Spring. And again, it goes through a really cool forest, crosses a couple creeks. And I also say the Beaver Flow Trail, also in Essex, is another one. You go by some rocky ledges and also by some lower wet areas. So again, almost every trail has a lot of features unto themselves. And so it's not just looking at views, but looking at the spectacular parts that are just make up nature and make up the outdoors.
Yeah, I would say a lot of these trails, or at least there's many trails that are, pretty easy in terms of difficulty. That they're flat. Some are flat and short, and they have loop options that you can make them, as long as you want. You can just go in for a little while, turn around and come back, or follow other loops. And a lot of these, one thing I found that was a lot of these trails, they're so close together that you can, if you wanted, you could do 1 to 2 to 3 in a day and kind of enjoy a couple different environments. And if the other thing is, if you showed up to one of these areas and the parking lot was full, which it can be at times, there's always a good hike just a short distance away, within a few miles. So this is a good example. So the last hike was just north of Essex, and this next hike at the Essex Quarry Trail that we're going to talk about is just south of Essex. And the Essex Quarry Nature Preserve opened up in late June officially, and it's a quarry that's been there for a long time, and provided stones for many of the local buildings, and also some buildings throughout the state. Chris, what are some of the buildings throughout the state that it's provided bluestone for?
Well, the two that come to mind is Brooklyn Bridge and also the State House down in Albany. So those are really two prime examples. Mm-hmm. And if you come to Essex and go through Essex, many of the houses there are made from those stones. So it's used in a lot of places. So,
and what I liked about this is when I did this trip, I did a walk through the quarry, and then afterwards, I went to the kiosk at the trailhead, and there's a map there that shows you about 10 buildings in Essex that you could go and walk by or drive by and look at, and they have they're made from the bluestone. So I did that afterwards, and that was kind of a neat little trip to make you appreciate the area a little bit more. And I was wondering, so this quarry property had some types of forests that you mentioned previously. It had some limestone woodlands and the clay plain forest. Did you want to mention anything about those?
Well, yeah, sure. Is that when the landowner came to me and said that they wanted to have it become a public area, and that they'd sort of done as much quarrying as they thought the quarry had or could do. I came and looked at it, and the first thing I saw was this cedar forest. And I'd already known that this is called a dry limey woods. That's the, sort of common name, but, the official name is limestone woodland. And while that sounds like it'd be a fairly common forest, it is actually a globally and state rare forest type because it only occurs in a few places around the world. And one of them is here at Lake Champlain. And so when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is a great example. And the clay or the limestone woodland doesn't always have to be dominated by cedar trees. It can also have some deciduous trees. And so as you leave the cedar forest, you get into more of a deciduous one. And as you go farther west, the soils become more clay-like, and that's where the clay plain forest is. And that's, as I said, a pretty a diverse forest community.
Okay. Great. We just got a question in that maybe you could answer. So Ed asked about the best trails for cross-country skiing. What would you recommend for cross-country skiing in the Champlain Valley?
Oh, it's the Hidden Quarry Trail south of Westport is really nice. It's relatively flat. Then also the Biles Crossing Trail through the fields is also very nice. Let's see. Ancient Oak Trail is an amazing cross-country ski. And then, when you go down a little bit farther south, down in Mariah, they've got some amazing trails in the forest there. For example, Crowfoot Pond Trail is a really good cross-country ski trail. And if you take a look at our map, we have all those areas that are good for skiing noted on the map. So, so to take a look and go out and explore. And I'd say one thing is that on many of the trails, you'll get to break trail. So while you might go, oh, I'm going to go on a well-groomed trail. Well, there's other places you might go for that. For cross-country skiing here, you're out many times the first one on the trail or the second or third. So it's really wonderful cross-country skiing.
Great. And this is the last property that we're going to talk about. And I was wondering if anyone, if there's anyone in the audience that had any questions, you can put them in the chat room. You can ask there. Do you have anything you want to ask Chris, you want to find out about? This is a good time to do it. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you, Chris, are there any trails that your new trails that your organization is working on right now?
Yeah, and actually we've got actually 4 that we're working on. So it's a bit of a challenge trying to, keep making progress, not so much keep making progress on them, but, try to get them done. And so, there's one down in Mariah called Broughton Ledges, and we're almost done with that one. And that's a 4-mile trail that has an amazing series of switchbacks going up this mountain. And then goes back to a wetland, and it has amazing views of this place called Broughton Ledges. Bill Amadon, my colleague, said it should maybe be more Broughton Cliffs because it's almost a cliff, but that's an amazing trail we're working on. It's sort of a difficult one, but on the other hand, it's really amazing. Then also there's one called West Valley Trail in Lewis. Thankfully, a couple of landowners came to us and wanted to have a trail on their property. And so we're working on that, and that connects to a property that SUNY Plattsburgh owns that not many people know about called Twin Valleys that has, it's about 600 acres in the whole trail system for the SUNY campus, and the West Valley Trail connects to some of those. Then also there's one we've been working on in Essex called Essex Gateway Trail, which would lead from the town of Essex out to Blockhouse Farm. I guess the fourth one can't really come to mind right now, but and there's another one, which is a new one. The landowner completed it called Lonely Hill Trail, and that'll be on our map, which I said was just recently published. So check those out.
Okay. Now, one of the big events you've had in past years was the Grand Hike, right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I don't think that's happening anymore. What are you guys doing event-wise this summer?
Well, let's see. We had the opening for Essex Quarry, which it wasn't a big event. We just invited people to come and hike on that day. Coming up in the fall is a part of Adirondack Harvest Fest, where we celebrate farming here in the Champlain Valley. We've always had a hike associated with that, and this year we're looking to have a series of hikes that will be on some of the farms. Then we have what we did in place of the Grand Hike was we had a Grand Challenge, where if people hiked a series of trails, then they would get a patch. We have that now going on up in Clinton County called the Northern Pathways Challenge, where if you hike 3 trails that are designated, 3 of 5 trails designated in Clinton County, that you get a patch. And we're looking forward to having a grand opening for Essex Quarry sometime likely in September. And we're talking about grand skis in the winter and another grand hike starting up next spring. So we've got a lot of things we're planning for. So stay tuned.
Okay, so we had somebody in the audience ask about volunteering for trail work. Could you talk about that? What opportunities there are there?
Yeah, we make trails mostly with the help of volunteers. And so we have volunteer trail projects, and we work to have at least one on a Saturday every month. This month or this summer, since we've been working so hard to get these new trails done, every Tuesday and Thursday, we've been having volunteer projects working on the trails. So if you go to Champlain Area Trails website and join our email list, then you'll get emails letting you know when the volunteer opportunities are. We also want people to take care of specific trails called trail stewards or trail adopters, where they adopt a trail. And then also what we call trail stewards, which is instead of adopting one trail, you volunteer to just go out and work on a trail that needs to be worked on. And as you can imagine, some of the trails need some skilled work, like building bridges and building boardwalks, putting in post holes and things like that. And so we're working to have trail crews of people to go out and do work like that. So just contact our office, ChamplainAreaTrails.com, and you can learn about those opportunities.
Okay, great. One thing I was always curious about is what were some of the first trails you guys, your organization developed early on?
I think one of the first ones is called Black Kettle Trail, and that's over at Black Kettle Farm, which is in Essex. It's now where Lakeside School is. And the Eddy Foundation owned that. And thanks to Sherry Amsell, an amazing naturalist, as that school opened up, they wanted to have a nature trail. And so Sherry put an amazing trail in there. Then the other trails we really started out with are on the Boquet Mountain Trail, which connects down, it basically goes from Essex down towards Westport. One of our goals is to have trails connect our towns. And one of the first things that happened when I moved here was Tim Barnett, who is the executive director for the Nature Conservancy, took me up on Middle Road in Essex. And from there, you can see this whole landscape that sort of stretches along the lake from Essex down to Westport. And as you look towards the Adirondack high peaks, there's a mountain, Boquet Mountain. And so Tim said, Gary Randorf has this vision. Gary was the former director of the Adirondack Council. He said Gary Randorf had this vision of a trail going from Westport to Essex along the lake, and then returns all the way back to Westport's through the Boquet Mountain. And so that's been a vision that's been our guiding star, you might say. And so one of the first things that we did was work to put that in place. And thanks to the Eddy Foundation lands and many other private owners, we've made great progress doing that. We still have a ways to go, but if you look at our map, you can see that that's an amazing trail system that you can explore.
Great. Well, I don't have any other questions now. If someone from the audience wants to raise another question, they can do that in the chat room on the side. Chris, was there anything else you wanted to mention or talk about?
Yeah, just the one thing I'd like to mention again is Essex Quarry Nature Preserve in Essex, just on the south and southwest side of the village. And it has an amazing story. Is that again, the 1800s it started. It had stones that went to the Brooklyn Bridge, and the last owner is Al Ulmer, who actually died several years ago, and his partner Terry Dinnan were sort of artist masons, and they would take out the stone and make amazing walls and then make amazing buildings with it. And so Terry came to me and said, hey, we'd like to see about having this be a public area. And as I took a look at it, as I said, there was a limestone woodland, but also the stones have amazing fossils. And I'd learned that through a hike that we had led by Nancy Budd, who's a former geology professor, that New York and Vermont were once separate continents, thousands of miles apart. This is like 400 million years ago. And along the New York coast, stretching from Newfoundland down to Tennessee, is the world's oldest coral reef. And that's where you see these fossils in that remnant of the old coral reef. And then, so you look at this property and you go, God, it's got an amazing forest. It's got fossils, it's got a geological story, and it's so important in the history of the Champlain Valley and actually the history of New York State. So the obvious thing is, yes, let's see what we can do to make this as a nature preserve. And again, working with a lot of generous donors and getting some grants, we were able to raise the money to purchase this property and make it so that it's now a public resource and a nature preserve with amazing trails that people can explore and use as an educational resource. So I'd invite everybody to check out that trail, and it's already becoming very popular. And of course, get our map and look at the other trail opportunities here, and come and volunteer and help us make more trails.
Great, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like you mentioned the enthusiasm of the landowners. That obviously must play just a key part in you creating this network of trails there. I mean, I've just thought about it as, throughout this slideshow, and every time I come to the Champlain Valley, there's just so many trails that go through private lands, and I think that's just very impressive that many of these landowners are willing to do that and allow hikers on their property and invite them in. We just got a question from Jeff Levitt about maps. Where can people find maps to visit some of these trails?
Oh, they can find them in almost all the towns here in the Champlain Valley. For example, in Essex, there's a kiosk behind Town Hall. Most of the businesses, if you come to our office in Westport, we have a kiosk, and also our office has maps. But also, we're happy to send it to you, and it's free. So just contact our office, Google Champlain Area Trails, or go to www.champlainareatrails.com, and you find how to contact us, or send an email to info@Champlain Area Trails. Sort of interesting, because we put out, again, being a nonprofit organization, we have advertisements and a lot of publications, and we have a pretty picture and talking to, say, Champlain Area Trails, easy trails, level terrain, or something like that, and then or something like explore the low peaks of the Champlain Valley. And it says, for a free map, contact Champlain Area Trails office. So I'd suggest for the questioner just to let us know he wants a map, and we'll send it to him.
Great. Well, thanks for everybody for attending, and thanks, Chris, for spending so much time, providing information about these trails and working on them. They're a great asset to the Adirondacks. So thanks very much, and I'm going to end this call right now.
Great. Well, thank you.
So, thanks. Have a good night.
Okay. Are you talking to me too? Great. Thanks.
Thanks.